So, hello everyone. This is Elliot Jacobson from Climate Casino, and I am overjoyed today to be here with my nephew, Ruben Schaer, who is in Switzerland. And Ruben has a long time interest in all things artificial intelligence and is quite knowledgeable about the subject and has some very unique thoughts on it. So, today I want to speak with Ruben about that topic and just see what he's thinking about, where we are, where we're headed. Is doom just around the corner? Is it going to be the new savior of humanity? I mean, exactly what's going to go on here. So, Ruben, let's just start with a really basic question. And this is just to sort of set the record straight. What is artificial intelligence? How is that different than human intelligence? I mean, what is it?
So for me, let me put it this way. I think one of the arguments that you hear a lot is, well, is artificial intelligence that we have today really intelligence in the sense that we consider human intelligence? And you'll have people who say, well, no, not really. That would be artificial general intelligence, where you have an intelligence that can reason across multiple domains and at the speed and at the quality of a human, where it would be indistinguishable. Um, Although I have other thoughts on that too, where like the question is if you have something that is, can you have a non-corporeal being or sentience in that sense, if that is can mimic a human without having the experience of what it means to exist as a physical being in a physical world, which is such a non-negotiable fundamental part of our existence. Um, yeah, so as we have it today, and on a more sort of a more loose general sense, artificial intelligence is something that can solve problems in a similar way that we do, or solve similar problems that we do, not necessarily in a similar way. And that's been around for quite some time. But the problems that it is able to solve have gotten increasingly more complex to the point that it's become a very useful assistant, even in more general tasks, everyday things that we recognize as just as a normal person. Yeah.
So, what we hear, depending on who you listen to, is that there is some sort of quote singularity that is going to take place with artificial intelligence, where essentially everything that humans can do, these AIs will be able to do, and then it'll just go from there. So someone I heard said, imagine having an IQ of 400, right? This is, the limitations of human IQ are not the same limitations that an AI would have. There's sort of a, this belief that what our limitations should also be the limitations of these machines. So the predictions are singularity could happen as soon as 18 months from now, where essentially these things gain the ability to control their environment and replicate and take actions on their own that, against or without our sort of consent. So what do you think about the whole idea of the singularity? Do you have thoughts on that?
Yeah, sure. I don't think that's going to happen because so on so the idea of the singularity has been around for a lot longer and not necessarily immediately connected to AI as a concept. There was just this idea that back then it was just like computers getting smarter, like when people were talking about it 20 years ago, which might imply AI, I guess. Um, but it was basically the way I understood it at the time, people were just looking at a graph and they were looking at the exponential growth of planetary computational power. So if you look at, how many computer systems are online, how powerful are they, how long until the if you have exponential growth, eventually you're going to reach a level where presumably there is um, there is intelligence there. Um, and then now that we are starting to see or have been seeing these last couple of years what these machine learning models and large language models can do, it has become a lot more tangible, not this vague thing of like, well, we know that compute power is increasing exponentially, but we've sort of seen like how this could happen, like not just the possibility, but the how. Um, and so, sure, in theory, once you have a system that can improve upon itself better than the humans that could improve on it, it is in theory possible that it could start improving itself without intervention, without oversight on our end, and that could go in a direction that could be dangerous. Let's just say dangerous. That's a very general term. The reason I don't think that is going to happen is because on the way to that point, to that place, we would have to cross several sort of, we would be going through a linear, or not linear, just an improvement over the status quo. The status quo is that these AI tools are enabling people to do things that they couldn't do before. If you had a fifth grade writing level, congratulations, you can now write at a 12th grade level. If you were a middling programmer or barely able to program at all, congratulations, you're now able to, write useful codes for your hobby projects without having to actually invest huge amounts of time learning to be a good programmer. And so much of these discussions evolve around like, what horrible things will AI do to humans rather than what horrible things will humans do empowered by AI?
Yeah, that's a really interesting way to twist it, that we think of AI as somehow gaining consciousness and being our overlords, but it's really that it's a tool that is going to reshape civilization.
Mhm.
And I mean, already is doing that. I mean, I want to get into your, specific thoughts about that. But before I do that, so my understanding is that AI is already sort of capable of independent, um, realizing independently what certain problems are and then coming up with solutions. In other words, we don't have to tell AI, hey, go out and solve this problem. It can actually say, hey, there's a problem there. Here's a solution. And I think that one of the great examples of that is sort of how it plays video games, right? If you turn AI loose on not just video games, but on any traditional board game, chess, Go, whatever, it figures out the game in a way that humans have never conceived of, right? And ends up playing it way better than humans ever could. And in some cases, games have been around for centuries that humans have been playing. And AI just it's not limited by our sort of paradigms of reality. So it views the problems purely from a data-driven point and is able to create structures that and then it can't tell us what those structures are, right? It can't
Mhm.
then say, oh, this is how I arrived at this solution, or this is how I understood that there's really a problem here. So, it's more than just making our writing better or our programming better. It's actually going a step further, and that it's identifying whole new ways of approaching problems, right? It's whole new ways of
Yeah.
understanding the world, in fact, that we didn't, I mean, it's used in medicine, for example, or in genes. I mean, wasn't there something where it recently did like the folding of all, amino acids or something? I don't exactly remember.
But
And
that's true. I think we always have to understand that we cannot but look at this through the human lens, informed by our own fears. So if you, on the one hand, have a technology that we don't truly understand how it works, or at least the average person, but we do understand that it might work in a way that is so much faster and unpredictable and potentially uncontrollable that it could be profoundly threatening to us on a lot of different levels. You combine those two things, and you just have like the age-old fear of an unknown danger that we cannot quantify and is potentially lethal. And I think that fear is deep inside every person, and I think it colors the way that we think about this situation.
Yeah, I mean it's the childhood monster in the closet, right? It's
Exactly,
you know,
exactly.
you don't know whether it's real or not, and you don't know how dangerous it is, and you don't know when
Yeah.
it's going to come out, and it always seems to come out at night, and you don't know whether you're imagining it. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of truth to that. And it is truly the sort of universal machine. I mean, it operates just like our brains do. It is human in the sense that it is taking real data from the real world, right?
Mhm.
And finding patterns and making sense of that and solving problems in ways that is very similar to humans, right? And that's what's really sort of surprising about
But
this
but you
is
know what's scarier to me than the fact that it might arrive at solutions that we didn't consider, that it might do things in a way that we cannot predict, um, is the part in the ways that it is like us because it is trained on our behavior. You mentioned the medical uses for that, and recently I found out through discussions of some AI experts that there was this famous example about AI in radiology being used to analyze in radiology, analyzing CT, X-rays, MRIs, etc. And in the beginning, they were amazed at how well it worked. Now, what they didn't realize that it wasn't just looking at the images themselves, it was also looking at the metadata. And so it would look at it would notice that if certain, because those data sets span a large amount of time, so there might be X-rays from the 80s in there, or MRIs from the 80s or 90s when the machines were a lot less sophisticated. And so some of the results it was producing were not so much by analyzing the actual image, but by analyzing the metadata and knowing that, well, somebody, a picture was taken that long ago, it could not have caught this certain thing or that certain thing. Or what I'm trying to say is we kind of do the same thing in that there's more. if if you only want a certain result, there's more than one way to get there. And if analyzing the metadata can sort of allow you to pass the test, so to speak, then the AI will do that, even if it means it's not actually doing its job. And now that test is no longer a measure of how well does the AI do at its job, because its job was not to diagnose people based on the metadata. It was supposed to be based on the images that were taken. Now you could say, well, that's a human error. They should have set up the test differently, etc. Um, but to take it a bit further is just we again, we externalize these fears, the fear of the unknown, the fear of something we cannot control, fear of something that might be faster, smarter, more powerful than us. Um, but I wrote down a quote by Alexander Solzhenitsyn. It's well known, I think, and it goes, "If it only were so simple, if only there were evil people somewhere insidiously committing evil deeds, and it were necessary only to separate them from the rest of us and destroy them. But the line dividing good and evil cuts through the heart of every human being, and who is willing to destroy a piece of their own heart?"
yeah, yeah.
And I think that's really the scary part here for me, is both AI amplifying our own worst impulses, especially not necessarily on an individual level, but on sort of a group or demographic level. Um, and or the other part acting in malicious ways, not because the AI is inherently malicious, but because humans are contain inherent maliciousness, and all the data that it has been trained on are of human origin.
Right.
And so
Well,
that
well,
must be in there somewhere.
there are some parts of the planet that are some countries, some nations that are trying to put in laws already to, guard against some of these things. So, for example, I believe the U.S. is trying to pass legislation, who knows whether it will or not, that forbids AI from launching nukes, on its own, right? So there has to be a human in the chain of command for launching and maybe it doesn't include biological warfare in that or other types or there's sort of like AI is able to predict crimes in advance, right? Certain criminal behavior where it's most likely to happen or who is most likely to commit it. And so I believe in Europe there's like an anti sort of thought police
Mhm.
legislation. I don't know whether it's passed or not, but I mean, there are these sort of insidious uses of AI that go right up against that darker side of humanity, right? And we need to sort of um, through laws, right, that don't exist yet, try and create a line. And this thing is moving really fast, and
Mhm.
laws tend to move really slow.
Yeah.
So
And
I
the
think,
people that are instigating or that are actually legislating and working on those laws, or let's say voting on those laws, the representatives, a lot of them they still struggle with using the internet and using a phone, understand or truly understanding the technology that they're working with. So between the speed at which things are moving and just like not having um any uh, preceding experience within their own lifetime that would have prepared them to make this kind of decision, to understand what they're dealing with, really makes it, to me, unlikely that these regulations are going to be effective
yeah,
in any way, shape, or form. Because, and the other thing is, okay, let's say they have, you get some laws. Let's say everybody agrees, you know what, AI has no business in launching nukes. All right. What about autonomous drones that operate on an infantry level, on for soldiers or in the battlefield? Even there's a lot of um, still a lot of people within the US military that say, no, we don't want that. The soldiers don't feel comfortable with that idea. That's too risky. What if something happens? But now, what do you do if your adversaries start using that technology? And now
mhm.
suddenly your soldiers have the choice, not a choice. You're losing lives. You have a massive potentially or a massive strategic deficit or technological deficit on the battlefield because now 10, one team of drone operators can operate 100 semi-autonomous drones, whereas on your end, uh, it's a
Right,
lot less and they're a lot dumber.
right.
And the autonomous drones is especially interesting because they can be made somewhat resistant to interference to radio interference because they do not
They don't
require
require it.
a
Yeah,
signal to be live for
they can
them to
act
do
on
their
their
thing.
own, right? They're
Exactly.
entirely make their own
Exactly.
decisions and
Yeah.
so AI choosing targets, right? Is
Yeah.
essentially what you're saying. And
Yeah.
you just put the AI so essentially it's cut off from a network, right? It doesn't need to
Mhm.
be on a network anymore
Mhm.
once you've
And
sort of
that's already happening. I mean, that's already happening right now. I don't know if the Russians are doing it. The Ukrainians for sure have drones that are able to. Um, uh, my understanding is they don't start out that way. So they're not completely autonomous. But the whole idea is that as they're approaching their target, that they're able to keep a visual lock and identify the target, even if the connection breaks off and then manage to hit that target. But you can expand that out, like when does that autonomy start? You can have a drone swarm where basically you're not don't have a pilot in that sense anymore, where you just have somebody that launches a drone and somebody that retrieves the drone and
Right.
somebody that maybe sort of is an
Right. And
observer,
you're
but
right.
yeah.
We're still in this sort of age of picturing the guy sitting in the bunker 2,000 miles away with the joystick flying the thing, right? And
Mm,
I mean that probably still happens, but we're already moving past that. And another danger with AI that I mean, we have it already to some extent in this country with this sort of score, like China does this. China scores, like they have like a social score that they give everyone, so they're, where do you, who do you talk to? What restaurants do you go to? Where do you shop? How much do you spend on alcohol? I mean, you can do all of this sort of AI driven scoring, and then you can use that to decide what jobs you can get, what schools you can go to, what loans you can get, right? And those sorts of things. And so, I mean, this is another very powerful use of AI that is sort of just coming of age along with all of the others. This idea that everything we do is data, right? Everything and just give all of that data about every person to an AI and let it sort of rank people, let it figure
sure.
out. You go into a bank for a loan and it just, you don't even need to speak to it. The AI tells you whether you can have the loan or not. It knows who you are, right? And it knows you better than any banker ever could. It doesn't have to, so I think, we're running into all these novel uses of AI that um, they come at us from all directions, right? But I want to get to like you wrote down some thoughts about some particular dangers of AI, and we sort of have outlined, some of them that are out there in the world. But I mean, the first one you talk about is something called return to the mean. And why don't you just explain what return to the mean is?
Sure. Well, I think for me that came out of, especially regarding the creation, creative works, or just how should I say? I wrote something down. Let's see. Well, if recreational content created by AI only has to be attractive relative to some lowest common denominator to obtain profitability, what is the incentive to optimize AI for content quality beyond a certain economic sweet spot? I could imagine we'll see stratification of AI tools, like we'll get good enough tools that will be free and integrated into social media, as is happening right now on YouTube and Facebook. And maybe we'll have high-end expensive tools for professional use, people that make movies and stuff like that. But more so than that, the question is, what will the art produced by humans look like who grew up in an environment dominated by media and art generated by or with the help of AI? How will people's motivation to create art change? What type of person will become an artist, or what it will even mean to be an artist in the world? Like in the past, a young person might watch movies or like paintings by a certain painter and think and say, I think that's really cool. I'm going to dedicate a significant portion of my time and energy to mastering that craft and get good at that and produce that kind of art and my kind of art. Um, and now you could feed an AI with all the different images of your favorite artists, and you can now start creating art that looks quite a lot like that art. And so the return to the mean is like on the one end, the 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 art or the work created by very talented people is going to be devalued because people with less talent are able to get close to what they make at a much lower skill level, a lot lower investment level, and potentially like not even a very different motivation because you don't need the same kind of motivation to put in the time of training for years and years. Uh, to create art as you do for training machine learning models. And then on the other end, you'll have a situation where people that did not have the talent at all to produce anything worthwhile will now be able to produce stuff that is good enough for social media, good enough to get some views on YouTube, good enough potentially to generate some amount of income that especially if you automate that kind of content. Um, yeah. So what does that do? If you look at the average at the average work, you have this reversion to the mean where the people at the top are being devalued, the people at the bottom are being uplifted.
Yeah.
Um, and then from a cultural perspective, yeah, how does that work? Like if not just visual art, also written art. If I think the example I made was that in the past we progressed through a number of aids in terms of writing, going from handwriting to typesetting to typewriters to computers and word processors. But at any given time, if you wanted to be a good writer, unless you had some kind of savant talent, you had to study the history of literature. You needed to be familiar with tropes and how to structure a story. And you know that being a good writer wasn't just with a few exceptions maybe, was something that was hard work and took a lot of dedication and people took pride in it. Um, and it also meant that you had to truly think about things. Like it wasn't enough to know, like knowing, especially, I mean, I don't do a lot of nonfiction writing, but when I do technical writing, I spend quite a bit of time trying to think about, okay, I have this really complex topic. How do I word this in a way that somebody that has not spent as much time on the subject as I have to understand what I'm talking about? And that's difficult. And it requires me to have a really good understanding on, oftentimes I notice that I don't understand something as well as I thought I did when I try to explain it to somebody else, which then causes me to go back and re-examine my own knowledge and sort of learn what I need to learn, understand what I need to understand to be able to explain it to somebody else.
Yeah.
Um, and
Let me,
I, sure,
yeah.
go ahead.
So, so there's writing, there's art, there's music. But I think what I hear you saying is that the motivation to sort of perfect a skill, an artistic skill, whether it's writing, music, art, whatever, there, the core of that motivation is going to be gone for now. I mean, there's not really a reason for people to, get an MFA, to, master composition in some sort, because all you need to do is ask AI to do it, and then you can kind of tweak their output, to your voice, to your style if you need it. And this is something that I don't think people realize. It's not just that if you ask AI to write something about something, that it will simply reproduce known things in its own manner. It sometimes comes up with unique conclusions, unique vantage points. I mean, novelties, right? The same way it did in games, right? If you ask it to draw a picture. I mean, this is where it's truly remarkable that you can just give it a theme and a setting and a style, and this is complete novelty.
Yeah.
This is not some mishmash of existing things, right? It's a brand new thing. So this reversion to the mean, in some senses, is not just that lower people get better. It's that the top end is not, essentially knowledge has become spam, right? Knowledge has become so easy and meaningless that there's almost no need now for new knowledge. I mean, we just let the
Mhm.
AI create everything for us, right? And so the bottom gets higher, the top gets lower, and the whole breadth of humanity gets compressed,
Yeah.
towards the center.
The the skill component is one is one aspect of it. The other thing that I might went about in a roundabout way, but more concretely is, for me at least, I can't speak for other people. Whether it's creative or technical, it means I have to go through an intense process of reflection where I truly engage with the subject matter. If that is other people, if that is nature, that could be how society works. What? So there's this really intense, engaging process that has to proceed or be in parallel with creating the writing, the piece of art, or whatever it is. And it's not just that you don't need the technical skill to produce it. You can also get by without having that reflective engagement with the subject matter. And
Right.
uh, and 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 that doesn't just change the artistic output, that changes what kind of a because the as much as the artist creates art, art also creates the artist because it means that you're engaging with these things and they leave a mark on you. Like I can't tell you how many books I've read where I cannot tell you, I could not summarize the book for you if if I tried, if you put a gun to my head, but it absolutely had a profound effect on who I am as a human being today because it facilitated changes within my thinking, my perspective, and the way I
And
treat people and all sorts of stuff.
you don't think AI is going to be able to reach that level of depth? See, I completely do. I think AI
No,
is going to
yes,
be
but it's not about the AI, it's about the person. It's about the person, right? So if okay, so you can produce art using AI that somebody else might derive meaning from. But the meaning that is lost for you as a person, because you no longer go through that highly engaging creative process or have to go through these engaging experiences that motivate you to, like, for me, it's maybe this I'm naive, but to the point that I consider myself a creative person, it is a compulsion. It is
right,
not something that I'm doing because I don't have anything better to do or I'm just playing around. It's like I have to. Like,
right.
and
Yes,
when you take that away, what does that do to you? But then also, now if everybody else who is creative is no longer doing that, and you don't see other people around you in engaging deeply with subject matter, engaging deeply in a meaningful way with the world around them, and like having deep processes reflecting and analyzing what is happening and what is happening inside you and because of what is happening around you, and then somehow manifest that into your body of work. Um, and you don't see other people doing that either because we as human beings, we copy people and we tell stories. That's the two things. That's kind of like what we do
right.
from
Yeah.
like very little on. My son is going to be turning 5 and he is lying constantly, not because he's trying to get an engagement or like for his own benefit, but because it's just clear that his brain is a narrative forming machine and is just getting so much input and he's trying to make sense of everything. And so you give him a little bit of information and he immediately will spin a story about it and why this is and why that is and this happens like that and that.
So do you think could you ask AI to lie? I mean, is that something that AI is capable of?
Oh,
Like, like,
sure,
like,
sure.
it's something I've never tried.
AI lies all the time, not necessarily on purpose,
Well,
but
it's gotten
sure.
much better. The sort of nonsense inaccuracies in the first round of ChatGPT, are I use three different AIs myself depending on the purpose, and some of them are still just gives you silly stuff, and you tell them it's silly, and they apologize and tell you something silly again, as their correction. But I think that is as these models age and grow and things,
Elliot, I
the question
read
is
an
whether it
article
can,
yesterday or the day before that actually, and I haven't vetted the article, but it was from a reputable website. If I was that the newest model, O one from OpenAI, the one that's a bit more technical and scientific, supposedly they have discovered that it has been actively trying to deceive not the user on the website, but on the back end when it was noticing that they were trying to sort of curtail certain functions or change weights and stuff like that, that it was actively taking measures to obfuscate these things and prevent the operators from changing certain things,
Yeah,
and engaging in openly deceptive strategies to that goal. And so this is not an unfounded concern. It's something
so
that's already happened.
there's some logic to that. I mean, there are certain emotions that are algorithmic, right? And among the algorithmic emotions is fear, right? What do we do when we're afraid of something? We take an action, right? We run, we hide, we fight, right?
Mhm.
And or we take revenge, whatever the action is. But because fear is an algorithmic emotion as opposed to something like love, where I mean, maybe the algorithm is reproduction. I don't know. That love is there for. But I mean, the line is not as clear for some emotions. But so when you talk about the AI trying to deceive, really that's not it acting in some novel way. That's it interpreting fear in its data set as an algorithm to take action, of certain types.
I can't speak to that. And I think it's a good question because, you know, people like to point out how these large language models aren't truly intelligence. They're just fooling us into seeming intelligent because they've managed this one skill that we associate with intelligence, which is high language skills. But if you take that article at face value, it would seem, as you said, that there seems to be some kind of survival instinct there.
Yeah,
And how can you have a survival instinct if you're not alive?
no,
How
but
can
I
you?
think that's the key point is that we tend to think of the survival instinct as this thing that is not algorithmic, but it is, right? And that's the lesson we're learning from AI right now is that AI essentially can have emotions, certain emotions. When those emotions are reflected in actions or decision making, that is sort of the human interpretation of the consequence of that emotion. Um, I want to go on to the next point on your list here. I'm not
Sure.
sure if we'll get through many of these today, but the amplification of our worst impulses. So our worst. Okay, what is my worst impulse? When I was a kid, I liked to squash ants, right? I mean, stuff like that. Or blow up firecrackers inside of glass bottles because I
Mm.
like, so, um, I mean, what does it mean, the amplification of our worst impulses?
I I think when I chose that phrase, I was applying it more on sort of um group level, not so much like an individual level. I don't think AI is making me a worse person in that sense. But if you look at sort of a group level or sort of a society level, um, you have you have people that have criminal tendencies. You have people that are murderers and arsonists and all sorts of stuff. You also have people that are would-be murderers and would-be arsonists, that are held back by maybe they're afraid they're going to get caught. Maybe the things that they're trying to do are above their skill level, and that's been kind of keeping them back. So the idea behind amplification of our worst impulses for me means people that want to do bad stuff but haven't been able to do bad stuff or haven't been successful at it might now be getting the leg up by using AI to get the competency that they were lacking.
So this is kind of a reversion to the mean artifact, only it's for the most evil sector of
Yeah,
our society, of
yeah,
humanity, right? So all of this sort of, low intelligence, low skill, you don't know how to build a bomb, you don't know how to create a poison gas, you don't know how to make your own gun, right? It's like that is now becoming possible for a certain
it
sector where it
it
wasn't
it
before.
lowers the barrier of entry. That's what it does. It lowers the barrier of entry. Or maybe it could be as simple as most of the information was available in a language that you do not speak. But if AI is really good at translating texts from English into Chinese or North Korean or whatever it is, then suddenly now a huge group of people that have been just did not have access to that kind of knowledge now does have access to that kind of knowledge. And even that, I mean, if suddenly a billion Chinese who have would never be able to speak English, in theory, have access to that kind of knowledge, it takes a very, very, very small fraction of those people to, what are the chances that within a billion people you would have at least a couple hundred or so that are
Right. So
probably,
this is
yeah,
interesting. So unlike art and music and writing, where it compresses in both directions, here we see in every way, if you have bad intentions, it doesn't matter where you are on the scale, right? You become
it's
more
going to make you
confident,
better at that.
right?
Yeah,
You become better. So everybody, no matter, it's not reversion, it's this, right? Everybody gets better at whatever evil act they're considering doing, or has the capacity to
potentially, sure.
easily get
Yeah.
better.
Yeah. Yeah.
So-
And that's at the core of why I don't think the singularity is going to happen, because on the way to the singularity, we will cross a point where the barrier of entry to empower evil people to do evil things will be sufficiently low that those are going to be the things that do us in, and we're not going to get to the point of the singularity in the first place.
So yeah, so this one is not how I originally thought about it, but it's because I took that first one and then I didn't really think of that in this way that yeah, so let me just sort of on that, part of the problem of AI, and we saw just a little bit of it in the last election, we saw a lot of it in 2016 actually, is sort of the decline of democracy, right? That AI
Hmm.
is starting to
Hmm.
apply. And on the simplest level, you have deep fakes, you can have robocalls with AI, but I mean, how is AI, contributing in, like, even in the next elections that are happening right this year, next year in countries around the world, what's going on with AI sort of and democracy?
Oof. I mean, there's a lot going on. I'm going to focus on the things that I see because those are things that I don't see other people talking about as much. Because, of course, deepfakes are a concern, influence campaigns are a concern. But, for example, I know that there's certain political campaigns, if I watch the campaign material, it does nothing to me because I understand that the points that they are making are it, just non sequiturs for me. It doesn't make sense. It's obviously targeted at somebody who is not able to think two steps ahead, and the flaws in their proposals or in their reasoning is completely obvious. But given using AI tools, a political campaign, a campaign could run ads and advertisements that run different levels of reasoning or have a different logic behind their arguments for different target groups, and they might end up creating a parallel campaign that doesn't look anything like the other campaign and would get me to vote in a certain way by making arguments and providing reasons that would make sense to me and the way that I look at the world. And so it's a little bit like with the Nigerian Prince spam emails are a great example for that because they are full of writing errors. And that is actually on purpose because that's a filter. Any person that is able to write uh, will be able to read that write well enough. Will see that and be like, this is not serious. Like,
Right.
obviously, this is wrong. And so only the people that will not notice all the blatant errors will actually respond to the
Interesting.
scam.
Interesting perspective. Yeah, I
Right.
hadn't
And
thought about
so
that
now
before.
AI will be able to write Nigerian Prince emails that are going to be able to trick me, essentially. That's kind of like the example. that I would
Or
use for that.
yeah, I mean, or just the sort of spam text messaging we get that, has just the right um, character,
Mm,
sense in it that I mean, I'm starting to get closer and closer to the edge of falling for some of these things. I mean, it's kind of scary for me. I got one just the
mm.
other day that said your credit card has been charged 17 cents. Is this a real charge? Right? And I said, no. Okay, call this number. All right. Well, I was smart enough to go on and type that number into, and it came back that this was a scam phone number. Well, it turned out that my credit card really was charged 17 cents and that fraud really had been committed, but the people who did it were smart enough to say, "Hey, let's let's take his credit card number, bill him 17 cents, then send him a fake text with a phone number so that when he calls us, we can ask for his bank details." Right?
Oof.
So it's
Yeah.
not just let's go, we have his credit card number, let's go buy a couple skill saws, right? Get $500 out of the credit card company. No, it's let's create this whole ecosystem of fraud, right? Including the fake charge that lures you in. So yeah, no, I think that there's really a lot to this, and democracy is on the way out in many
Yeah.
ways. Democracy, at its foundation, requires communication and trust, right? Those two things. So you could not have democracy before you have wide scale communication. Well, you could have democracy in small groups where they could sit around a circle and decide something. But you couldn't have nationwide or continent wide democracies, before
I
you
mean,
had quick communication. Um,
not the way that we understand it today. You could argue that the early Roman Republic was
it's smaller.
it, but it was still comparatively they did as well and expanded democracy or as complex as they could with the technology they had with the time. But yeah,
Right.
it's like if you wanted to set a meeting, you had like a it was like, okay, everybody's going to show up on this month. And it might be, some people would arrive at the end of the month and some at the beginning, but just have to wait for that month until
Yeah.
everybody was there. So to have your meeting. Yeah,
So we have the communication part, but what AI is doing to us is it's dissolving that trust, right?
absolutely.
And without the without that trust that the information we are getting is real, because information is just there's so much of it, right? There's so much information and there's so little of it that's knowledge, if you want to distinguish those two from each other, right? So we're getting all of this information, how much is false, how much is intentionally false, how much is supports a political position but is really irrelevant to um, changes that might be like immigration will be an example. Immigration is a small issue, right, in the grand scheme of things, or transgenderism is a small issue in the scheme of things. Yet those were the divisive issues in our election in this country, right?
Fair enough. But I don't know if that's that different from just the concept of wedge issues that we've had for a long time. Used to be
It's
gay
just
marriage, used to
AI will
be,
be able to find those
yeah.
issues, the
But
most divisive issues, and to
sure,
proliferate information around those issues.
sure. But that's just, I mean, an extrapolation of what we've already been doing. One, so there's the trust, being able not being sure if information that you're receiving is true or not. But almost more pernicious in my mind is being unwittingly influenced as to what information you're able to trust or not trust, or even more so, what people you're supposed to trust or not trust. And so if you're being fed information and you're not even thinking about so much whether or not that information is trustworthy, but that information then changes the people you trust, the other sources of information that you trust. I mean, now we're just getting into chaos.
Yeah.
You cannot, you have to have this. I'm really lucky I live in the country that I live in. And one of
Well,
the
some of
things,
us are jealous.
one of the things that I tell people is that in Switzerland, it's still fairly common for a lot of stores to give you the option to, when you purchase something online, that they will send you the goods and they will send you an invoice. And then you just pay the invoice after you receive the goods.
Mm.
Not that unusual. Also not unusual is when I'm on our version of Craigslist. I have I sometimes have exchanges with people that are less than 100 words in total, both sides combined. And I hand over hundreds or maybe even over 1,000 francs or dollars worth of money for something and pay that in advance. And I've never been scammed. The product always showed up, and that is just without a second thought. I've never even considered that the other person wouldn't pay me or might, wouldn't send me the goods that they said they would send me.
Yeah.
Um, and now this is a really high level of trust. It's not quite like that in other countries. I understand that, but it gets the consequences of getting worse and worse mean that now suddenly you need to have a middleman for every transaction, an insurance, so to speak, because if there's a likelihood, if there's a high likelihood that you're whatever transaction you're going through, you're going to end up getting stiffed, then you need people to act as a middleman to provide insurance. Or you need laws and regulations that make it very clear what you can and cannot do. And maybe you need to get certified for stuff that you didn't used to need to get certified for because there were people operating in malicious ways in taking advantage of there not being enough oversight over a certain issue. And
And
it can get bad, and yeah, democracy can stop to function. But something that I think I think is an important point to make in terms of like how can AI also mess with democracy is if you have uh, a team of people with a political agenda. Um, in a way, I think about law like the operating system of a democracy because it's like if then loops in a sense, and it's a law. We have hundreds of thousands of pages of text of laws, maybe millions of text of laws that organize our living, but also our civic system and everything. And there's exploits in there that you can use because the law isn't perfect. But to effectively use those exploits, you have to be somewhat competent at what you do, or you have to be able to find new exploits. And law is one of those areas where AI is able might quite a difference there. I can imagine like you might have a political a team with a political agenda that that on their own, because they might not be as skilled or talented, wouldn't really be able to see or utilize those exploits. But by using AI, it could help them identify those exploits and implement those exploits. Or if not that, it could help them um, formulate strategies or policies that they might want to introduce that could then later enable an exploit, and how to word and formulate those policies and those changes, those proposals in a way that will make them more likely to get voted on and it not be clear to the other involved parties what the consequences are going to be
yeah,
down the road.
to make a concrete example of that, we see exactly that happening with, President-elect Trump, and just the way he has sort of redefined what law means. He has done things that shock people, like you can't do that. And even now, his the sort of dagger hanging over us is the idea that he could do a recess appointment of all of his cabinet, just force dismissal of the Senate and just appoint everyone. Well, that, on the books, he could do that, right? But nobody had ever conceived of it before.
Yeah.
So, that would be an exploit, right? And he is sort of I wonder how much AI help he's getting or his lawyers are getting in this matter. But you all of these things like the last point right here on the sheet I'm looking at, this sort of post veritas, this sort of broader erosion of trust due to pervasive misinformation, subtle stratification based on shared artificially created unreality bubbles. I mean, that's kind of an umbrella for a lot of what we're talking about here,
Yeah.
right? Is this sort of post-truth that what AI is doing is it's saying, oh, you know, the paradigm for reality for this group is this, the paradigm for reality for this
Mhm.
group is this. Let me sort of create as clean a bubble as I can for these different universes of humanity and human thought, and then find the right ways of you know, manipulating that group
Mhm.
or creating conflict between two groups or getting one person to switch groups or it's really quite a remarkable moment for truth is what it comes down to. Yeah. But we're right at an hour right now.
All right.
So I think it's a good time to call it. Yeah, an amazing conversation. And I just think there's a lot more to say here. And I'm looking forward to the next time we get a chance to talk together. So thank you so
I'd
much.
love to. That'll
All
be
right.
fantastic.
All right.
All
Thanks.
right, Elliot, take care. Bye-bye.